People were not used to buying coffee online, and especially not on a subscription model, freshly roasted, high quality specialty coffee.
We are gastronomes.
This is Juicy Gastronomes, the podcast spin-off of Juicy Tap in collaboration with the University of Gastronomic Sciences of Pollenzo, gathering the stories of gastronomes from around the world. Stay Jewish, stay gastronomes. We are Gianluca and Claudio, and this is Juicy Gastronomes, a spin-off of Juicy Tap in collaboration with the University of Gastronomic Sciences of Pollenzo. In this podcast, we collect all the stories of the UNISG alumni who are innovating the food system. And today, we bring you the story of Yorick Bruins. Yorick comes from the Netherlands. And he is the founder of Wakuli, a coffee company that is trying to change the coffee market from the inside. If you are enjoying the podcast, stop for a second, start following us and leave us a rating. It costs you nothing, but allow us to grow this project and make it better and better every day. Now we can start. Yorick, it's a huge pleasure to have you here. Welcome to Juicy Gastronomes.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
It's great, Yorick, to have you here. This is our first international interview. You are our first international guest. With this podcast, what we are trying to do is always to explore the future of gastronomies, but we are doing it with people that studied or passed through the University of Gastronomic Sciences. So we know each other quite well. I'm super glad to have you here. As usual, we love to start our interviews with an introduction of our guests. So tell us, who is Yorick? Which was your path, your studies, and the different experiences that led you here today?
Cool. Thanks, Luca. First of all, I'm just as excited to be on the podcast as well. And congrats with everything you reached till date. I'm happy we can finally share this with the international audience as well, right? Even though I don't know how many people want to actually listen to me. But I'm happy to kick it off. First of all, yes, we know each other originally from the University of Gastronomic Sciences, right? Where we first encountered. I studied there from 2012 onwards, my bachelor's there. But before that already was very interested in food and gastronomy in a broader perspective. Before starting the university in Italy, I had the opportunity to work in different restaurant kitchens. After graduating high school and failing my first bachelor's degree, which I tried, which was law. I only started law because I thought that might make a good buck, but I never actually knew why. I had to decide at age 16. And what do you know at age 16, right? I mean, you guys made maybe the decision a bit earlier and better, but I didn't. Well, through a different route, I found out in the end that food had always actually been my passion, but not only food in the narrow sense of eating and drinking, but mostly also understanding how it's produced, where it comes from, and why we consume what we consume. And that led me to, at a pretty early age, work in a few different kitchens here in Amsterdam, where I'm from, or I'm originally from the north of the Netherlands, but from the Netherlands. And afterwards, also starting my own small catering company together with one friend, catering people's homes with food that was locally produced and consumed and telling the stories of those producers. That led me in the end to deciding that I did want to study. It just wasn't law, right? But I knew at some point I wanted to do more with my academic career as well, and ended up at the University of Gastronomic Sciences, where in a quick 3 years I was able to deep dive into the world of food and agriculture in a very broad way. After which, without making it too boring, but moved to London, to the UK, where I did a master's in food policy at the Center for Food Policy, thanks to a very bright, now emeritus professor, Timothy Lang, who also taught at the University of Gastronomic Sciences at some point, and was able to study with him and did my master's there on especially the interesting crux of understanding how trying to feed the whole world, let's say, but at the same time have such conflicting policies between health and agriculture and other sciences that made that we now have such a, excuse my language, but fucked up food system. And fast forward from the UK, moved into coffee, was able to do a little stint in Tanzania, advising a coffee farmer cooperative on access to markets and access to finance. And that little stint ended up being a few years in the East Africa region, where I got hired as an agricultural consultant, specifically focusing on coffee and a few other crops, but focusing on coffee cooperatives and coffee farmers and their access to market, access to finance. So their position in the world food market. which was extremely interesting, where I learned a lot about coffee and learned a lot about the position of smaller farmers at the beginning of coffee value chains, as well as some other chains like cocoa and spices, which have similar traits as coffee. At that time, also decided that I didn't want to be a consultant for the rest of my life, or at least not for too long of a period, but actually want to be part of that problem that I encountered in the coffee industry. And together with my co-founder, thought of a way to actually become part of the coffee industry by starting a business, which now is called Wakuli, and back then was called the Wakuli Market, and try to solve some of the issues that I encountered, mostly the inequalities in a global chain where there are millions of producers on one hand and billions of consumers on the other hand, with a few global players in the middle deciding how we consume and deciding how farmers get rewarded, but also how we drink our coffee. That happens around 2019. Before that, I always forget, but I spent a bit of time in Nepal as well. I also worked in the tea sector for almost a year, created a network in South and Southeast Asia, working in that area. And that all led up to Wakuli.
Before going to Wakuli, I think there are some small other elements that we would really like to deep dive into. First of all, Yorick, let me give you a very warm welcome. And as Gianluca was saying, I'm very, very happy to have you here and to have you here as our first English-speaking or international guest. I had a very big curiosity, actually, because it's very interesting to learn how people that we host get to gastronomy, so to food. And for you, it was quite clear in the sense that you told us that you tried your bachelor in law, your degree in law, and then you were like, okay, so I want to study. This is not my stuff. So let's go to food. But why coffee? So why, after your bachelor in gastronomic sciences, your master in food policy, what was that brought you to Tanzania and say, coffee is my thing and coffee is the thing I really want to do?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And honestly, if I look back at that time, right, at the period between 2010 and 2015, when I was exploring the different realms of the food system, I don't believe that coffee was the only thing I'm interested in. I'm still not only interested in coffee, to be honest. Like, I ended up in coffee because I think it was the most wicked problem I could find in long and unequal value chains. But in the end, what interested me most when I looked at the food system and its persistent issues was mostly the disconnect in these value chains that were often neocolonial, so that were produced on one end of the world historically in a distorted way and consumed in another. And that were so disconnected from each other, right? So I worked before in other, like I did stuff in fisheries and in other places. But what I found so interesting is that at least like in some of the most produced commodities in the world, like coffee, cocoa, tea, etc., we never know our producer, and we're also not able to know our producer simply because that chain is so intransparent and difficult to assess, but also because there's a geographical divide. And weirdly enough, that started at the university as well. I did a didactic trip to Ethiopia in 2013, if I remember well, which was my first encounter or professional encounter with a coffee tree and their farmers. And it was in the east of Ethiopia. It was a Lavazza project in the Harena rainforest, and it was wild grown coffee. And before that, I mean, imagine 2013, I was 22. I had only maybe seen a coffee tree once while backpacking at age 18, but I cared about other stuff back then. So it was the first time I saw coffee in this relation. And I actually thought that all coffee was grown that way, right? The first time I saw coffee, it was wildly picked in a rainforest by farmers that were actually hunter-gatherers in a way, right? And I thought, well, is really all coffee produced like this? And if it's all coffee produced like this, like how is it possible we can consume that much coffee while every berry is handpicked this way? And that sparked my interest. And at the same time, of course, encountering a farmer group that was, first of all, extremely hospitable, but second of all, very poor, right? Where I remember, and in Italy it's a little bit different, but on average paying back then 3 to 4 euros for a cappuccino here in Western Europe. So that sparked my actual attention to say, okay, how does that work, right? And then beyond coffee, also in the tea and what I said before, other value chains, I did actually my bachelor dissertation or thesis on the cut flower industry. So what does it look like? Which is a very different neocolonial crop. How does it work? Because we as the Dutch, right, are the biggest exporters of flowers in the world, but it's nowadays at least for 50% or more coming from the East Africa region, so Ethiopia, Kenya, and etc. And that interest I always had. And then after my master's in London, it could have gone many ways, but I was interested in these tropical agricultural commodities like coffee. And luckily, my former employer first gave me a job in coffee, and I actually never left. Otherwise, I might have had a tea or chocolate company right now. But luckily, I'm in coffee because in the end, it's something that I personally also enjoy very much as a product, even more than the other categories. I can never say this out loud. I just did. Because I think it's the most consumed agricultural commodity in terms of value in the world, right? Which also makes it interesting because we're sort of starting with the biggest issue.
And as a big, not really the biggest, but one of the biggest commodity consumed around the world, of course, its supply chain is that long and that complex. That comes with problems. If you had to identify the main problems of the coffee industry and the coffee supply chain, what would it be, or what would they be? In a sense, is more on the social point of view or more under the environmental sustainability. And I want you to take this question and to bring us to Wakuli. So understanding from this analysis, what are the things that then brought you to say, okay, I want to start my own company to solve what?
Luckily, when I talk about the main challenges, we always end up with Wakuli, right? Because I believe it's one of the solutions. So we're going to get there. But generally, I would say that, well, I think also in our bachelor's in gastronomic sciences learned that it is a holistic point of view, right? That one touches the other in a way that there's not one issue that is that persistent. But I think where it all starts with, in coffee specifically, and in some of the other commodities as well, is underpayment. And underpayment, you can call it an economic or social issue, has a lot to do with what I briefly hinted on before, and that is that inequality in terms of power and information in the coffee value chain. And that has everything to do with the history of coffee, right? I mean, coffee was planted by people from the global north in colonial times in the global south because it doesn't grow in Europe, right? Just to be clear. Well, in Sicily, they're trying to plant some, but it's not working that well yet. And then what we're seeing is this hourglass model, right, where we do this and where we see what I said before, a few billion consumers not knowing where their coffee comes from, a few multinationals. The 9 biggest players in the center operate on 40% of the whole coffee value chain. So they own 40% of everything that is drunk every day. And then there are around 10 million producers with 100 million people working directly in coffee production. So around 100 million people on the beginning of that. The problem of that inequality in terms of power and that imbalance in terms of information makes that, on the one hand, consumers can't really at this moment choose the way they consume coffee because they buy commodity coffee off the supermarket shelf. And it's all sort of the same. I'm going to generalize a little bit here for the sake of the arguments, but it is actually true. You're buying a different brand, but if you buy, let's say, the big Italian brands, they, in the end, all buy from the same commodity markets, except some of their extreme rarity coffees or one of their sustainability lines. And then on the other hand, producers have zero foresight or idea about where their coffee is consumed, how it's consumed, where it goes towards, how the pricing is set, right? Because that pricing is not set actually by only supply and demand, but by future market, by hedging, and by other ways on an international market. For Arabica specifically in New York, and for Robusta in this case in London, very far away from coffee producing country. And that is the main issue, because that means that when the power is not at producer or the consumer side, but somewhere else, there is an issue of underpayment. And that's what's happening currently, right? So to make the issue a bit bigger, around 70% of all coffee that is produced, or 80% is produced by smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers in this sense, we're talking, right, often between 2 and 4 acres of land. They produce relatively little. They don't know what they're getting for that crop. And they need to keep investing because it's an annual crop, right? It only is harvested once a year. It takes a lot of investment also because it's a tree. So you need a few years before it actually gives fruit. And they don't know what they're receiving for it. And historically, that price has fluctuated extremely. hasn't gotten any better in the last 50 years. If you take into account that also the lives of coffee farmers became more expensive, like the lives of people here as well, right? I mean, that happens worldwide. So if you take that into account, actually coffee farmers are earning less today for a kilo of coffee than 40 years ago. And that issue makes that underpayment, that many farmers are actually living below the poverty line, not able to sustain their livelihoods. Of course, people working in coffee feel the same because they will be underpaid as well, because farmers pay workers in the end to work on their lands. So that is a bigger problem. And that rolls into my second point, that underpayment underlies all other issues in the coffee value chain, according to. And that is, for example, the environmental degradation, right, that you hit on. So the fact that coffee farmers are not able to actually invest in regenerative farming or in intercropping or in other cases, are not able to investigate how they can get rid of chemical fertilizers and other inputs that we previously brought there in the 1970s to tell them to up their yields, right? Because in the end, underpayment makes that you can't think of anything more long-term in your next cash cycle. And again, this doesn't count for every coffee farmer in the world. We talk about 70 countries, 10 million people. I'm generalizing for the sake of making sure that we have the arguments that is correct. But this is how it works. So that's also why at Wakuli, to tie it in, when we started in 2019, talking only about price. We didn't touch yet upon environmental degradation. We didn't touch upon other social issues that are very much part of the coffee value chain, right? Like the position of women in coffee, issues around child labor, etc. Because also these can be underpinned by price. Child labor is only there because we pay too little for coffee, right? Because you would send your child to school if you have enough money. If you don't have enough money, you keep your child at home and have them work in the farm. So price is the baseline. And that's also directly why we started Wakuli and started saying that the big guys, the big coffee companies around this world, right? The Nestle's, the JDEs, etc. They need to start talking about price as well, because everyone who's ever talked about sustainability in coffee has spoken about all these other things. Yield improvements, right? Coffee farmers should produce more to be profitable. Coffee farmers should produce in a different way to be profitable. We should plant trees. We should do this. We should do that. No, we should pay a proper price first, and the price should be set on how coffee is produced, the cost of production, plus a proper profit to reinvest in the farm and have a living. And only after price we can talk about other things.
And yes, Yorick, what you are describing probably looks like magic because you are speaking about something that is super complex and you managed to find a solution, to find an alternative. And so I'm very happy that now all our listeners can listen about the story, about your project and what you are doing for the coffee supply chain. I think that we covered in this podcast with the different episodes, all the different main products, main commodities around the world. And there is this leitmotif, then the longest is the supply chain and the lowest is the price, the more complexities and then the more issues will be behind. And so it's very nice to have people like you that helps us to uncover the different layers of complexity that we can find in this supply chain. So you told us you traveled around the world, you fell in love with the coffee, and with Lucas, you decided to start Wakuli. Before letting you tell us about the story of Wakuli, I want just to do a little bit of story time, because the fun part of this interview is that I said sometime that one of my first experience was in a startup in the Netherlands. And guess what? The small startup in the Netherlands was actually Wakuli. And actually, I was the first employee of Wakuli. I was part of that journey. I was part of the vision of Yorick and Lucas that saw an opportunity in the market and decided to follow it, also sticking to their values, because at the beginning when you do entrepreneurship, it is easy to find the compromise. And since the very beginning, they were good enough to have a vision to find also some fallacies in the market, because all the system that now you will explain to us allowed you to be even economically sustainable from the very first moment. And so now, Yorick, it's the time. Tell us about Wakuli. What was the first idea, and now the project has evolved over time, because from the small garage when we were packing coffee at the very beginning, delivering the first pack of coffee by bike, now you are in multiple countries, the business is growing, you are not just selling coffee through online, but you also have your physical store. So the journey has been crazy, and bring us with you along this journey, please.
Yeah, We'll do a little deep dive, but first of all, as well, John Lou, we still miss you in the offices. I mean, the offices might have changed, but you're always welcome to come back whenever you're done working in corporates and making great podcasts. But continuing from there, so we started in 2019 with this idea that what we spoke about before, these inequalities have a lot to do with the fact that there is no direct relation between production and consumption, right? And that is one of the main issues that persist in underpayments and other issues in the coffee value chain. And luckily, with my network in Eastern Africa and South Asia, and the networks of some colleagues that have started with us since in the sourcing and impact arena, we were able to directly work with farmer cooperative and associations. So organized farmers, right? We don't work with individual farmers because they produce too little to supply us. So they always work together in a cooperative or association or another structure. We've been able to work directly with farmers, first in East Africa, and later we expanded that around the world to now 14 countries, where we source from them. We pre-set pricing before harvest, including quantities, etc. So they know every year what they can plan towards. We come back every year to buy more coffee. We don't shop around. And we imported coffee to the Netherlands, roasted freshly. And then in 2019 also decided to ship that directly to customers. Because we said, what if we actually want to take all the big players out of this value chain and create this more equitable value chain, right? With only few players involved. Farmer cooperatives and their constituencies, us and the consumer. And then it started to make sense to us that actually we should go direct to consumer. And that was back then, in 2019, only through your mailbox. So we started this subscription business where people could actually subscribe to their favorite coffee, ground their way for their type of brewing method through their mailbox on a regular basis, right? On a weekly to monthly basis. And it was a bit risky because people, and it still is, honestly, right? We're still fighting for market share. It's not different than 5 years ago. But people were not used to buying coffee online, and especially not on a subscription model, freshly roasted, high quality specialty coffee, and paying a small premium, not a high one, right? Because we always went for volume first over a high profit margins per bag of coffee. And actually, Gianluca, you said we were economically viable from day one. I would like to disagree. I think in day one, we weren't economically viable at all because we subsidized every bag of coffee in the beginning to make sure we had a certain market share to be able to actually be economically viable and offer a coffee, a specialty coffee, freshly roasted against a price that is similar to the mid to top shelf supermarket, which in the Netherlands will be between Illy and Lavazza, let's say. From that moment onwards, from 2019 onwards, and you being on board at John Doe, and then in the end, the team slowly expanding, we also moved to new facilities, and we're able to source more coffee from our partners in origin, and of course, find more markets first in the Netherlands, and get more people actually hooked on this idea that they don't have to walk to the supermarket anymore to buy coffee, and that there's a specialty alternative that tastes better right through their mailbox. And there, I think we're hitting a very important point, because Wakuli is not just importing the coffee that everyone else is importing and then roasting it and selling it. We are only working with high quality coffee, what we call specialty coffee, right? And that's important because that creates the win-win between farmers and consumers. Because with farmers, we work towards quality, which sets them apart from the commodity markets, and therefore also reasonably they can ask a different price for it, right? Because the coffee is not interchangeable for any other coffee in the market. Think of wine or cheese or any other product where we're wanting or willing to pay for a certain product because of its specific traits. And on the other hand, for consumers, because it's a lock-in, they go away from dark roasted, still supermarket coffee that in the end is only branding. It does all taste more or less the same, maybe with a little bit of a different roast level. And they are exploring new flavors, fresh coffee that is actually vibrant and not just a way to wake you up, not just what we, in Italy, you sometimes say, right, the espresso after lunch, the medicina, but actually something to enjoy during the day. And that makes, in the end, that we create this win-win for consumers and farmers alike, and also a reason to stay, right? Because it might be nice to try something new, but if it's actually better for you, if it tastes better, and at the same time you know that in that coffee value chain, you're doing well by purchasing this coffee, I think you create an option for consumers not to have to leave anymore, and that's important. Fast forward from 2019, we first ran the subscription business for the first few years. Obviously, during COVID, we were able to keep servicing our customers. We had some issues in our supply chains with coffee, with our farmers, right? Delayed containers, issues by like social distancing in countries of origin, etc. But we were luckily, by working together very well and having trust in our supply chain and farmers, we were able to work through that. And after COVID, we said, okay, what's next? And that was 2 years ago. We decided that only growing a mailbox subscription business wouldn't build this brand where actually Europe can believe in down the line to change this coffee industry at large and be the coolest specialty coffee brand at the same time out there, right? Because to go to a new type of consumer that is 25 years old now, we needed to be sexier than that. And obviously, we also saw what is the next step in the business model. And we explored different options, right? We could go through retail and we could be now on the supermarket shelf here in the Netherlands or in Germany, because we're also selling a lot of coffee in Germany and Belgium and some more around Europe. But then we decided if we want to tell our story, stay direct to consumer and lower the barrier for entry for specialty coffee, so get more people to drink better coffee, we needed to open our own bars or stores. The pilot we ran 2 years ago, the first specialty coffee bar, where we are both selling coffee on the go, coffee to go, as coffee for home, with a little bit of sit-in as well. But the combination of a retail store and a bar. And ran that first pilot in 22 and have scaled that business as well since. So besides online, servicing around 35,000 customers a month, also operational in 7 spots in the Netherlands. And for now, 6 bars in Amsterdam, 1 in Utrecht. And I'm currently, we are constructing 4 more towards the end of the year. So scaling that business as well. So now we have let's say a business of bars, physical retail and bar locations, as well as our online business, where we're still selling mostly subscriptions, but also bigger packages of coffee.
Yorick, every time we speak, I'm blown away of the incredible path that you have been through. I was lucky enough to saw it starting, and I knew that it could be something great, because now you have been very fast through all the story, but let me stress a couple of points that were incredible. The first one was that people maybe don't know, but in a value chain like coffee, usually there are between 10 and 15 different passages. So between 10 and 15 different people that wants to take a share. And this is the main issue, because of course the power relationship most of the time are not balanced. So you have the farmers that get paid a little, and then the final consumer that wants to have a competitive price. And so in the middle there are the big distributors and the big player that wants to take the most. You had the vision to create this system that was cutting all the big men and giving a fair share to everyone, still with the possibility of going to the consumer, not with an insanely high price, because it is what we see now in the market. There is some specialty coffee rising, a lot of niche producers, but then you go to these bars, for a cup of coffee you are paying €5, €6. That is nice because it's an experience. I mean, it's elevating coffee like a nice wine or a fancy cheese. But if you want to change an industry, and I know that we have this idea in common, you have to really influence the mass. You have to influence big part of the consumer. And so this was great. Then, of course, also leveraging e-commerce in a period where e-commerce subscription model was rising. It was 2019. It was before COVID. So also there was the vision there. And then also from a communication perspective, understanding then throwing at consumer the full complexity of the coffee value chain would have been too much, would have been overwhelming for the consumer. And so starting, I do remember the first campaign that we were running online, starting from the small insight of price, letting the consumer understanding that it was important to give each one in the value chain a fair share of what they were paying was brilliant. So really big congratulations for everything that you have achieved. And I have a question about it. Looking back at this now, more than 5 years of journey with Wakuli, what have been the biggest learning that you got out of this journey?
Oof, it's a difficult one, right? Because sometimes you're so deep into the company that sometimes you forget what you actually learned. But probably if I look back now, there are a few things that really stand out, and that is, first of all, if you are in a rat race of a company, right? So you grow very quickly month on month. You sometimes tend to forget, especially if you're inexperienced like I was, right? Starting a company at age 27, 28. Sometimes forget to work on your company and you're only in the company. And you for sure heard this before, right? This saying of working in versus on. But what that means to me is like when you grow very quickly, you don't look a year ahead anymore, but you're trying to keep up. But we should have, or I should have, in terms of like learning and starting a next company, which I might never, or hopefully never do, or just grow Wakuli to the size we wanted to grow, but to take more time to actually already think of the next step. And we've done this in time. I mean, we've pivoted from online only to also opening stores and bars, right, to further grow our audience and our Wakuli's presence here in this market. But I think taking more time sometimes to actually zoom out, because that, I think you do way too little. And it's way more valuable than doing the day-to-day tasks, which you can also sometimes already give away to colleagues that might be better equipped to do it as well. So that brings me to the second point. I think one of the main learnings is hire good people from the start. And Jalou, you left too early. You've been only with us for a few months. But besides that, I think we had a few very good colleagues. But I've also learned that from the start, hire the best in their industries. That can be very junior. That's not the issue. But hire great people, because then you can give away more of the work that you've been doing initially. And actually, you can accelerate your growth, right? Especially, again, if you're not that experienced, it's your first time running a business in this sense. And those are two of the things that I've learned the hard way in Wakuli, and that are not always fun to look back on, but at the same time also make that now I've changed that, right? I've learned from that, and we're hopefully doing better. So two of the learnings that come up right now.
So it's bidding on the right people, human resources that really believe in the project and give like their time and their experience for that, for the growing, and at the same time zooming out and understanding also in terms of strategy, which, as you were saying, can be difficult when you're trying to keep up with like a fast growing environment and a fast growing company.
Exactly, because before you know it, you haven't zoomed out for half a year, right? Because there's so much happening all day to day. So carving out that time, even when you feel you don't have it, is extremely valuable. And honestly, like we had a great colleague of mine who's our CMO. She started 3 years ago with us, and she obliged us to every quarter go out of the office for 2 days, rent a little wood cabin or camp somewhere. It doesn't really matter if you don't have any finances, right? But go out of the office, take some physical space away, and zoom out. Have a proper agenda and make sure that you actually evaluate everything you've done the last quarter, but also everything that's coming up next quarter and the next year. And already start thinking of plans of what happens if, right? Make a plan B, our next growth path. So what is happening? Imagine if next month our bars are now working super well from an economic perspective, but also from a perspective we sell a lot of beans, which in the end create a lot of impact. And from the perspective that Wakuli's name is becoming more and more famous in this market, more and more well known as a brand. What is next? What if it wouldn't work anymore because of whatever reason? And I think if COVID has taught us one thing, not wanting to look back as an old man too much, but if COVID has taught us one thing, is that we should be ready to change our business model overnight, right? And you shouldn't be caught up at any point.
Yeah, reviewing strategies and plans B in the sense like what if, as you were saying, is super, super important. And it's something that's sometimes everybody, not only in our companies, but also like when we work in projects and on our daily work, we should do so. Zooming out, understanding what's going on and understanding what's the way forward. Yorick, as Gianluca said at the beginning, here we are juicy gastronomists. So people from the University of Gastronomic Sciences, and we would like to understand how these people grew and how these people are growing. So the next question I want to ask you is, being a gastronome and being an entrepreneur, what is exactly the contribution or like the advantage that being a gastronome gave you when you became an entrepreneur?
Let's take the words that have been taken a million times from Carlo Pettini, good, clean, and fair, right? Buono, pulito, giusto. Means that in that sense, I think I've always approached issues in general, also my previous job, working in agricultural supply chains or other positions, to see how all this interplays in the issue that you're trying to solve. And if I very practically put this on Wakuli without wanting to paraphrase Carlo or anyone in the university, but I think in Wakuli we've been looking at the issue also in this holistic perspective to understand how we can actually create a good, so specialty coffee, good tasting, right? Well tasting, something that people buy into, because that's very important. It needs to be interesting and something different than already exists. Clean, obviously, what I said before, a value chain that produces in a way that I believe in is what we call in coffee future-proof. So that is ready for the next generation to farm in as well, and for the world to actually thrive in, right? So producing with the earth instead of against it, and fair. And fair, I don't have to say much more, but like a value chain where everyone is being rewarded in a way that we can still drink coffee and produce coffee in the coming decades to go as well. And I think that holistic approach towards being a gastronome also made that in the end, the way we build our business, so with all these aspects in mind, and there are a few more, right? But with all these aspects in mind, was the only way to go. And obviously there are trade-offs to be made. And we make trade-offs as well, right? There's no company who doesn't. But the trade-offs are minor enough to still holistically say that we're working in an ecosystem that I believe is the way to go. And it's not the only way to go. Let's also be very clear about that. Our way is our way. There are other companies who are doing great stuff in coffee. And we also shouldn't say that Wakuli is the only way to drink coffee, because it's really not the case. But it's our way to explain how we think, or to create an ecosystem that I believe people should consume and produce in a fair and in a good way.
That's clear. And this is eventually the final objective of this podcast, showing what does it mean to be a gastronome and the impact that you can have. But flipping the coin, because if there is a common trait that me and you and Claudio have, is that after the University of Gastronomic Sciences, that of course gave us an imprinting. Being a gastronome is something that you bring with you forever. But then afterwards, we decided to take an extra step and to deep dive on some other interests and things that we wanted to have. And you found yourself in this entrepreneurial mindset, in this entrepreneurial journey. So looking backwards at the experience at the university, do you think that there was something missing in the preparation, in the studies that we did at the university, that was lacking, that was not preparing you to be an entrepreneur? Something that in your opinion was important to know before, during the university, some important studies, some important skills that were missing and that are complementary if you want to become an entrepreneur, if you want to do something with your passion for gastronomy?
Well, good question, Danu, and I'm not sure, because like in the end, I think the studies were pretty holistically, but what I personally missed, even though we might have been taught it in a way or another, but I think that could have been better, especially if you were more interested in it, right? So it might have been something elective or something for people indeed like you and me, who are more interested on the entrepreneurial side of trying to solve these issues in supply or in the food ecosystem, is these business skills, right? Business management skills, finance skills. Like I came out of university, pretty bleu on understanding how actually business works. And that's a broad perspective, because you only learn business when you're in it, I believe. But it would have really helped me if I would have had a bit more focus in my university period to do that. And obviously what didn't help is that I also chose for a master in food policy, right? Because back then, even though I always was somewhere, I think, an entrepreneur at heart and trying to understand how business could solve issues, there's always been a very big interest of mine. I still thought I would work the rest of my life on other big issues like food security at the WFP, right? So I also didn't choose the right master probably to prepare myself there. The good thing is that you can learn all these things in your own startup, especially if your co-founder is more business savvy, at least historically, than I am, and I think he still is. I can give him that credit. But yeah, I think there some business management and finance courses wouldn't have, at least to understand the workings of business, right? I would have appreciated even more.
Of course. Unfortunately, a 3-year bachelor cannot cover everything. And the nice thing is that if you ask like each and any of us, we will have always like different things, because of course, depending on our interests, of course, like something else would have been nice to be equipped with to face our journeys.
Let me just specify, in order not to be misunderstood, that the Bachelor in Gastronomic Sciences is not always meant to teach you everything. Indeed, already at that time, the university had a master that focused more on the business and finance side of enogastronomy. And today, even more than how it was 10 years ago, it has multiple masters and executive masters and deep dive on specific topic. As always, in the description of this episode, you can find the links to see everything that the university is offering today. And you will see that now, more than 10 years ago, whatever is your passion about food, probably the university is offering something specific for that.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's also not forget, it's pretty unique, right? That there is a Bachelor of Gastronomic Sciences that I still have to explain to everyone, by the way, what it exactly means, because that's the fun part. If you pay a lot of money and spend a lot of time studying and then have to explain what you actually did. But that's fine, because one day it will be normalized. But for now, I think it's interesting already that there's a university focusing on this and that people like us actually come out of this university and hopefully do something to create a better world through food in the broadest sense. Let's also be appreciative of the university. But yeah, of course, if you ask me if I missed something, I'm going to be honest.
You spent time and words to explain what the University of Gastronomic Sciences or your bachelor was, but just imagine that we created a podcast to explain that. So how far we went to explain what being a gastronomist is.
Yeah. And honestly, rather you than me. I sometimes lie and I said that it's food and agricultural science just to create clarity in the one sentence I have with investors or customers or anyone else. But I'm happy that today we get to spend more time talking actually about gastronomy in a broader sense.
Here we are. Yorick, going back to Wakuli, I will ask you to do what you say, like zooming out, and by looking at what you are now and what Wakuli is today, I will ask you to look forward, to look at the future, and to tell us what Wakuli will be so let's try to have a mid-long-term perspective. I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, you choose. What are the projects for your future and for the future of Wakuli?
Yeah, if only I knew, right, Claudio? No, but vision-wise, I think, and that's what Janu touched upon before, is that we want as many people as possible to join this train, right? To drink better coffee with us or anywhere else. But that's our main mission. So creating an accessible offering of coffee that is traded in a way we believe in, the Wakuli way, it's the end goal. And all the ways to go to market. So if that is through your mailbox as a subscription, if that's by picking it up in one of our own locations, or if that's down the line through other channels, are all means to reach that goal. So creating an accessible offering of specialty coffee that is affordable for the majority of people. I don't say for everyone. Let's also be honest, right? But at least is affordable for many people to buy into, to easily level up their coffee game, have more fun at home or wherever they are to consume our coffee because it's better tasting. And at the same time, being able to give access to more and more farmers. We're now working with around 15,500 farmers in 14 countries around the world. Being able to give more farmers long-term access and with them at the same time invest in regenerative agriculture, which we're currently doing in 3 countries and expanding on. So I didn't touch upon it yet. But we're now going beyond just price, right? Which I said before, price is the baseline. And then we need to go to actually also invest in future-proofing the farms we work with. We co-invest there with our partners in origin. I think that's the goal. And what the avenue is will be decided on what the market looks like at that moment. But if we talk about where are we in 10 years, I would like to be the biggest specialty coffee company in Europe, at least. I think we are in the Netherlands from a consumption perspective, but the Netherlands, as you might know, and you have visited, I believe, is pretty damn small. So that's only the starting point. I think we've got a blueprint here for what the possibilities are, being in the streets, opening up stores locally for everyone to get acquainted with us, to lower the barrier of entry. Again, it's all about accessibility. You can drink a €2 espresso or a €3 oat milk cappuccino with us and only get to know the story before you maybe 5 purchases later also buy your beans or pods for at home. And at the same time, growing our business online because it's a very good way for everyone who normally doesn't have access because they're not in an urban area close to a Wakuli store, for example, to still access high quality coffee instead of having to go to their local supermarket. And maybe we are on the shelves at some point, but only if we're not dependent on it fully and if we can actually own that value chain more and understand better what the dynamics are there and grow our business into Europe and maybe down the line also beyond Europe. But let's look at that midterm where we are the biggest in Europe and have created the model and have proven at scale in different geographies that there's a different way about coffee production and consumption, that there's a different way to do coffee at large. And it's a bit arrogant, maybe, or a bit big thinking, but I believe we can do it. We're positioned to do it, and we have the team to do it as well. I've got incredibly talented colleagues that are working every day in and on our business. So yeah, I'm only looking forward to that future.
And you will get there.
A little bit of arrogance is necessary to paving paths.
By the way, I'm still waiting for Wakuli to get into the Italian business because to have my Wakuli supply, I always need to wait for you to come here in Milan and visit and dropping a couple of bags of Wakuli Wakuli?
We don't offer subscription in Italy yet because we need a certain mode, right, to service everyone. Because in the subscription, we don't ask anyone to pay for shipping, but it will be a little bit more expensive because shipping will be involved. You can order Wakuli online in Italy as well, but just like a few bigger packages not in your mailbox, but like as a normal parcel. So for everyone listening from Italy, don't be afraid to try it out. It won't be bad for you. It will actually be fun. But yeah, hopefully we are physically present in Italy soon as well, Gianluca. I mean, you know how, and Claudio, sorry, how much I love Italy, and any reason to be back there would be a good reason, but it needs to make business sense first.
So, Yorick, we are bringing also on Juicy Gastronoms a nice ritual that we have on Juicy Rap, that is the closing moment of the podcast. That is in Italian, the Piccola Pasticceria. In the international version, we are sticking with the French name and call it Petit Patisserie. And in this last sweet moment of the interview, what we do is to ask to our guest for a suggestion of something that can be a book, a film, a music album, a podcast, something that in your journey was relevant because it was there in a specific moment where you truly needed it and you want to share it with us.
I have to be honest, first of all, I haven't listened to all your podcasts in Italian till date. So I don't know what all has been given as advice already. But I hope many of the things that have been given as advice related more or less to gastronomy in a broader perspective. So I'm going to not do that, hopefully to be a bit different. I'm going to go more on how to actually scale a business and be quick about it and make sure that you find route to market, keep focus, and actually make sure that you scale a business to what can be the next Nestle or Kraft Heinz, right? But then, of course, done our way. And one book comes to mind right now. That's of Frank Slootman. He is originally Dutch, but moved to the US 40, 50 years ago and ran multiple billion-dollar companies, mostly in tech. And the book is called Amp It Up. And he wrote that book for any entrepreneur, manager, or anyone who works in high-performing teams, talks about how to perform better, but in a way that is very practical and that you actually, from him running, being a CEO and now exited again, a multi-billion-dollar business, can actually implement in a business that when I first think we did €1 million a year, right? 4 years ago. So as a relatively small entrepreneur, you can start implementing these things. And actually, the tips I came with before are related to that as well, if I'm thinking of it now, right? So what I said, what I wish I knew before I started Wakuli, or at least what the main learnings from Wakuli. And two of the things I want to highlight in this book, one is rather nobody than somebody. And that sounds very harsh, but don't just hire anyone because you need anyone, or don't just work with anyone because you need any partner. Only work with the people that you 100% believe in from day one. So if it might be partners, people that you work with anyone external or anyone you hire on your team, only hire if you 100% agree as a team or with your partner, with your co-founder, that you need that person. Otherwise, rather nobody than somebody. And it's so easy to remember every time you're in conflict because you think you need somebody, but you don't have the right person. And a second thing that is coming from his book, and he also has a podcast about this, I believe, is what if you could do only one thing this year, right? What if there's only one thing left you could do? What would you do? And if you think about that question, like personally right now, if there's one thing left in 2024 to do, what would you do? Okay, spend 90% of your time on it. Because probably that's the most important thing, and that's what's going to bring you the furthest. And all the other stuff is noise. And of course, this is extreme. And the book is super American, so apologies in advance, right? Sometimes this business talk in American gets very tiring because it's also about firing 1,000 people and hiring 10,000 people. And like it's on a different scale. But I think a few of these questions, and these are just two of the takeaways, are things that we work with on a daily basis as management in Wakuli with only 70 employees, right? And staying on the business talk, can I also, because another podcast wouldn't be great to say, right? But still, Guy Raz, I don't know if you ever listened to him. I think you did. How I Built This, exactly. I mean, he made a million episodes by now throughout the years. And there are some of the best operators, entrepreneurs on that show in the world, right? He's getting really the best. From the Kava founders to, people in the food scene, but also outside. And always long, deep dives of over an hour. And I think that whenever I don't know what to listen to anymore, after, of course, Juice It Up, I will listen to Guy Raz and make sure that I pick the brain. It feels really like picking the brain of an entrepreneur somewhere in the world who's built something extremely cool, big, interesting, different, etc.
Yorick, what to say more? It was a true, real pleasure to have you here to kickstart this new journey in international podcasting. It was a story that, also speaking with Claudia and Alessandro, I wanted to tell since the very beginning, but we always have this language barrier because people don't know, but you can speak Italian. Maybe 1 hour of interview in Italian would be too much, and even the value that you can deliver to people in English is much higher than with an interview in Italian. But it was great to have you here. I loved hearing again the story of Wakuli. Is making me a little bit emotional, eventually even willing to rejoin the journey with Wakuli. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure, a real pleasure to have you here.
Gianluca, Claudio, thank you both so much for inviting me. Being the first international guest is really, really cool. And I wish you the best of luck with the future endeavors around you set up in Juice International. And it was great talking today.
Thank you, Yorick. Stay juice, stay gastronaut.